speaking of becoming a pilot, Douglas, Air Force pilot training crafts mental toughness.
Oh boy.
Yes, sir.
Can I mute myself for this one?
About to curse a lot. Hold on.
It's a long article, and I highlighted a lot, so I'll try to keep it pretty short. Stress can get to anybody, even Air Force fighter pilots. One F-35 instructor pilot, Hazard Lee, sees it happen to even the best students. And the other goes on to recount Hazard's recounting of a student starting to lose.
Yeah, that's the most
formation.
important part. No, that's it. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, we need to talk about that.
As I flew formation off him, I noticed altitude start to drift by several hundred feet, a telltale sign he was beginning to become overwhelmed as he struggled to manage his cross-check. The student eventually switched to the right frequency, but he let it get in his head. Collected above-average student was now flying erratically. The student missed radio calls, failed to descend at the proper times, and even tried to cut off another formation of fighters. Once they landed at Luke, he said he was angry with himself for the radio frequency mistake, and the anger combined with the fear of failing the flight pushed him into fight-or-flight response, which began to shut down his prefrontal cortex, and therefore his ability to make logical decisions. Is that the part you wanted to read or more?
More.
Okay. We have a saying in the fighter pilot community that you lose 20 IQ points as soon as you put on your helmet.
You missed the part where mentally unravel after a simple mistake.
Okay. Leah seemed mentally unravel. Pilots are often young, working under intense pressure to succeed in a dangerous environment. As far back as World War II, the then U.S. Army Air Force found that skilled pilots in peacetime often crashed in combat due to simple mental mistakes. Studies showed that stress severely reduced performance in tasks requiring complex or flexible thinking. It's a really good picture in F-35. In previous generations of pilot training, there was no formal education on how to manage stress and emotions, but a new program, Comprehensive Readiness for Aircraft Flying Training, is helping students fly better, score higher grades, and stay in the training pipeline. You're going to screw something up. It's just going to happen, so I had to recover. Lieutenant Colonel Carolyn Price Moore, Craft Program Director, told Air and Space Forces magazine, "Do you dwell on the mistake? Do you use your mindfulness, your emotional intensity regulation, and your diaphragmatic breathing to refocus on the present, to move forward so you don't get into a nervous spiral?" She's referencing things that are taught as part of the craft program. This is another set of quotes from Lee. It's kind of a default that you either sink or swim, and I was certain when I went to a pilot training. It was certainly was when I went to pilot training in 2010.
2010.
That's an effective technique. People who come out the other side are going to be solid, but the problem is the training is very expensive. So if people get halfway through that training and wash out because they have some issues with being resilient, that could waste a lot of taxpayer money. He discussed himself as an example. He said that he's not the most talented pilot, but has a lot of resilience. Confidence is a skill that can be improved primarily through internal dialogue. It goes on to discuss a program that grew out of U.S. Special Operations Command, which was, I think AFSOC was Air Force Special Operations, had a Preservation of Force and Families Task Force, which they developed techniques in, went on to use at Luke for F-35 student pilots, including dietitians, coaches, massage therapists, and cognitive therapy.
Nice night, guys. I gotta go. This is
all right. That's it. Thanks, Doug. We'll take it.
That enough to get you started.
We got enough to talk about. So, Gonky,
can we just take a moment of silence for?
Hold on.
Who just died.
Hold on. I think something's lost in the translation here. So it
can't be the whole story.
Stop. Just let's hear me out. Okay, hear me out. So I found that this article was shared to a group of fighter pilots, some of them perhaps older, and the level of scoffing was very high because of the very first story about this dude lost it doing a frequency change. So I want to put that part aside. We can talk. Sure. I want to talk about that separately, because I think that's a separate topic. The other stuff is awesome. You need resilience. I agree with him. You need to be a resilient person. Mental toughness is important. We talked about it in the Mental Health Minute. I think that the programs that they're doing, Luke is a leader in a lot of things. They were doing physical fitness training. They were doing chiropractors. They were doing stuff before it was cool because you had to, because flying fighter jets in this business is hard on your body and hard on your mind. So having performance psychologists and having mental health counselors and stuff. I mean, I of all people have benefited from having a counselor in the squadron and doing that. So I'm 100% behind all of that. And I think resilience is the key, and you have to train for it just like you train for anything else. So 100% agree with everything he's saying in that, not just him, but the author. And I'm glad they're doing this because it's very important as a fighter pilot to be able to compartmentalize stuff and be resilient for when you make mistakes. What I think is lost in translation is these anecdotal stories are terrible. They don't do what the article. I'm not saying the book. I've never read the book, and I'm not talking about the book. I'm saying what the article, like the thesis statement of the article, is not really. It's not really proven by the one or two examples, because we've all flown fighters with multiple radios. And I don't know about the F-35. It could be way different, but you should not have problems if the channel doesn't change. You just go on aux and say, hey, you hearing anything? No. Okay. It's not a hook your ride and stuff like that. So there's some weirdness in that story and how dramatic that actually is. But I agree with the don't let things snowball, because I've done an AIB report. The Shaw mishap was very much something like that, where they set this kid up for failure. He went out to a night seed ride. Suppression of enemy air defense is one of the most difficult rides you can do. Tanking for the first time. They didn't do it in the B course. He couldn't get fuel. He bingoed out, and then he didn't let it get out of his mind and ended up hitting the ILS antennas, going around. They didn't have him eject. He tried to land, and then when he ejected on the runway, the seat sep didn't happen, and he passed away during the ejection. So you can see where that snowballs. So it's a valid concept. However, I think it's a terrible example.
They buried the lead, as they often do in the news. The data's all the way at the end. If you want to see it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Have a look. I think this is probably the most significant piece. Crafts has already changed lives. Students in T6 and T1 Jayhawk classes who completed 3 or more craft sessions saw a 16 to 63% improvement in aircraft-related cognitive performance over students with fewer than 3 sessions. That's not as exciting to say, but that's the stuff that people should be looking at.
And that's 100% correct. And that's what I'm talking about. The program that this article is talking about is awesome. The stuff from the book that somehow gives you a dramatic example is not. Wombat? Oh boy.
First of all, I would have loved a masseuse advance. Yeah. That would have been fantastic. My question, and I am trying to, you bring up good points, Mover. I was definitely ready to just flame this whole thing when I read it, because it's ridiculous. You bring up valid points, but I'm going to ask a question before we talk about this more. I'm curious your thoughts, because you didn't have this training when you went through flight school. I know damn well Gonky and I did not have this training when we went through flight school. So why is this training needed now, vice back then? And my question is, have they cut down on pilot training so much and squeezed every hour out of it so much that you don't build up the resiliency just naturally in the pipeline? Because I'll tell you what, when I come back from a bad flight and I have an instructor tell me that I boogered things up, or I have one of my favorite Vance instructors tell me and ask me, and this is not made up, ask me, hey, Todd, do you do anything well? And I said, sir? And he goes, because you're never going to get your wings. Like, I mean, he was done at that point. This dude had never flown a gray jet in his life, and he was one rank above me. And he's telling me to my face, I'm never going to get my wings. Now, if that doesn't build some level of resiliency in you to be like, you know what, dude? F off. Watch what I'm about to do. Yeah. What does? I didn't need a masseuse. I needed to study, and I needed some things like that to get angry at and show them that I was going to show them what's up. So there's different ways to build the resiliency. My ultimate question is, do we need this one because we've taken so much of the pilot training and whittled it down to the point where it's so minimal now that they're not getting that. Are we afraid to hurt people's feelings, etc.?
So this is a advanced student who says it's basically strength coaches, dietitians, cognitive specialists who give you sleep study checklist performance. Dude, it's just another. So what they've done is they've taken commercialized, I don't want to call it commercialized, but the old aerospace physiology, that first 6 weeks of pilot training, and made it now a lifestyle. All this stuff, because they told you all this. I mean, at least for me, 2007, right? 2006, they're talking about, well, you need to eat right. Here's the food you avoid. You had an aerospace physiology go through all this stuff with you. Sure. Now it's more of a new program because psychology changes. I mean, right, Doug? I mean, we learn about the human mind and performance factors, and we get better.
We can look at people's brains without taking them out of their heads now.
Yeah, so that's nice. You didn't have. I mean, I get it, Wombat. We can, get off my lawn, and back in my day, and we had to walk uphill both ways in the snow, which I did, by the way. I busted my ass at Vance so many times in the ice.
Oh, yeah. Well, dude, Gonky and I were there when the tails of the T-37s were frozen to the runway for, like a week? We still went in every day for 12 hours, except for the snow day, which was awesome.
No.
Our snow day was awesome. There was so much. I'm not knocking the program. I don't want to be pinned as the guy that's like, oh, Wombat's the old crusty guy. And you have to adapt your training. You have to, right? People change. Psychology, people changes, all that. But my question was, the only thing I'm asking is, like, I guarantee you this dude from Vance who says it's legit, I'm not disagreeing with him, and, congrats, he's in flight school, but I'd love to see how many flights and sims he's doing compared to how many we all did. I guarantee you it's less.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
But all of that stuff, like, you don't just learn stick and rudder in the plane. You learn this resiliency. You learn all of this other dealing with things. You learn what happens when you don't switch a radio right and how to deal with it. All that comes with hours in the seat that cannot be replaced other ways. That's all I'm getting at. And I'm afraid aviation as a whole, military or civilian, is leaning towards this minimal amount of stick time, if you will, for lack of a better word, to get to the end goal. And it's like, well, at what point are we losing some of these soft skills? That's my only thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the question. I'm curious.
Please, Gonky, continue.
I personally think our kids are growing up coddled, period. I mean, no, not knocking on Hazard. I'm glad he wrote the story he did, because dude, imagine.
He didn't write the story. He wrote the book.
Imagine
they quoted.
Dude, imagine. So I was an instructor in the Hornet. So I read that when you sent it to me, and I immediately thought, I remember one night when I was with a student, and his rendezvous about put the flight lead's Hornet through the front windscreen. And I had to take the airplane, and we just barely missed him. I had to slam the stick forward. Everything went weightless. And I was like, WTF, because he was a good student. And the rest of the flight went fine. And I could have downed him for it, but I didn't, because he was able to mentally put the train back on the tracks and go. I was always taught in training, we can't shoot at you. So we're going to put stress on you. And you have to handle it, because in training, when you're in combat, you might not be able to go to the spa. You might not be able to go get your neck rubbed. You might not be able to not be able to get a pedicure with your favorite color. So,
who's the crusty guy now? I'm just saying.
These aren't my words. These are the words that were spoken to me. Like, because Wombat, I was told the same thing as you. Like, dude, you need to get a lot better. Like, you need to get better, or else you ain't going to make it, right? I mean, I think we probably all heard that. I mean, you and I went through in the early 2000s. And the crazy thing is, I remember being a RAG IP in 2010 talking about toughness, because when I was an IP, the students coming in then, I'm like, man, we are coddling these students a lot more than I got coddled. And we would talk about it. And I remember like a couple of my buddies are like, I was like, dude, what about the guys in the 70s, like in Nam and stuff? And we're like, they wouldn't even talk to us. Like, those guys, I mean, you join the military to learn how to kill people. That's a true statement. Don't do it for college. Join the military. The mission is killing the people that your government deems need to be killed. It's messy and dirty and very stressful. You need to be able to handle that. Now, I think these kids, like everybody gets a trophy. Mommy and daddy are mad at the teacher for the bad report card. All that stuff affects them when they become an adult because they think there's nothing wrong with them. They think they always win. I should always get a trophy. And then when they struggle in a program like flight school or any military program for that matter, it's like, oh, we need all this coaching and training. Yeah, you needed it like when you were a kid,
True.
Not now as an adult. But I don't know how to fix the problem. Maybe this is the way to fix the problem. And I know I kind of sound like the old crusty guy. I was a slightly below average fighter pilot my whole life. I could use all the help I can get, but I just think it's terrible that they are taking that measuring stick. Like if you're not tough enough, you don't belong here. That's period dot. I'm sorry. Like that's how I feel about it.
Go ahead. Sorry, Mover. I have something to bring up on that, but go ahead.
I look at it through the lens of our mental health minute. Because in the way I look at this article in this program is mental health is important. And if we can give people the tools so that it doesn't get to the point where they are, overwhelmed in an aircraft, and you give them the skills and the tools on the ground, there's no losing from that. On the flip side, I want to ask you, Gonky or Wombat, either one. Let's go back to the first scenario of this. You have a student that missed a frequency change. It sounds like this is one of the initial. I mean, the way I'm listening or reading this is at Luke. The rides are solo when you're doing your instrument stuff. You get your Form 8, and then you become now we're doing stuff. So if he's the one following his wingman around and he's off altitude and stuff, this is more likely in the instrument phase where you really have to be very precise. So my question to you, either of you, you're chasing your student. He misses a frequency change. It spirals down. He almost hits this other flight like they talk about. You get on the ground. What are you telling him? What is Gonky or Wombat's advice to this kid?
So that's a great question. And I was about to ask Gonky, what was the follow-up? And I bet I know the answer. And then I'll tell you a story that will answer your question, Mover. But what was the follow-up when you landed with the flight you just described, right? Where you had to basically take the jet, but the guy got his head together. Did you bring that up and go, hey, obviously that rendezvous was piss poor, but here's what you did that was good. I'm sure you did.
Well, what I did, it's right. You start off with, questions from the brief, safeties, right?
Done. I'm good.
Back admin. So we talked about it early.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, I told him, I was like, that's how you kill yourself. That's why if it's not moving across your windscreen, it's coming through your windscreen, right? We went through the whole thing, dude. Sure. We had the tapes, everything, right? So, I use it as a learning event, but he was, and I have more of those stories, like where like, oh my, holy, and then they were able to put in. Sometimes, some of the students, it took them a while, but they got the train back. Like I was always able. I never had to down a student because they couldn't get it back together, and I just think it's when I read that story, I'm like, how could this guy's flying F-35. So he's been all through pilot training. He's been through, phase 2? Was it Mover, T-38, IFF. He's been through IFF, which is super stressful, right?
But dude, we had that in our world in T-30. Remember we had people that came from IFF and they got to the T-38A and it was just super IFF for them. I mean,
yeah, but you would, that's not, almost killing yourself is something I would say, that would mess me up a little bit mentally here as I'm trying to continue with the mission instead of missing a radio call. I mean, to me, missing a radio call and not being able to handle it is unacceptable coping of something that happened that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah, it makes me wonder
how many radio calls did you miss today, Gonky?
Yeah, I did. I was going to say I missed 2 or 3 today.
How convoluted is that thing if it's that challenging?
Right.
How the jet? So how bad is the jet if you think you got a total comm failure?
That's pretty bad. And what I like about honestly this show the most is like Gonky hit on another point that reminded me of something. But And it's gotten me thinking, so, okay, try not to be the grumpy guy. So I agree. So I had a similar, and I think I've talked about it on the channel, so I'll give the short version, but I had a similar time in a T-45 in the back seat where a student shut the motor off because he thought we had a compressor stall. We didn't. Spoiler
and it's
alert.
got one engine, right?
And it's got one engine. So, I think it's fair to say that it may have gotten into his head a little bit. Now, I think everybody who's listened to me, and you guys know me, like I tend to use a smidge of sarcasm in my instructing. Like that's just a dash. So
you call my fat, by the way. I'm still mad about that.
So, dude shuts down my only engine, right, on a Friday afternoon. And
not on a Friday.
I know, it's the worst. And so I say to him, I'm like, hey, man, what just happened? Sir, we had a compressor stall. I'm like, okay. Did your ears pop before or after you shut the motor off? And he's like, I was like, because mine were before. And he's like, yeah, I think mine were too. I'm like, that's because we just lost cabin pressure. That was the noise you heard. And that was common in the T-45 when you get high alpha, it would drop. Remember? So I go, listen, you got the rest of our lives to figure out how to get this motor relit. Let's get it relit. It should relight because it was perfectly fine before you shut it off. So I think we're going to get it relit. And it did. And we knocked off the mission and we went back as a single. And I could see this happening, right? So this is what I really do enjoy about this channel. I could see him getting stressed out, flying back. Now here I am in the back. It's Friday afternoon. I almost had to punch out of a plane. And on ICS, I go, hey, man. And now this is not a knock on the Air Force. Remember, we're training Navy and Marine guys. So there's the camaraderie that we talk about, knocking the other services. And I go, hey, do you know the difference between a Navy pilot and an Air Force pilot? And he's like, what's that, sir? And he's I could hear it in his voice. And I go, a Navy or an Air Force pilot, a Navy pilot shuts down his only good motor. And we require you to get your head back in the game, go back and catch the 3-wire on the first shot back of the ship. That's what your CAG is going to expect out of you, period. And he goes, well, what's the Air Force? And I go, an Air Force guy forgets his peanut butter and jelly sandwich and lands gear up on a 20,000-foot runway because he's been thinking about his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I go, so get your head out of your ass and show me that you can fly this plane. And obviously, I'm not knocking the Air Force mover. You could have spun that around the other way. It would have worked. But what did he do? He turned around and he flew a great pass and he landed and we got out of the jet. And I did the same thing you did, Gonky. I did not fail him because that guy learned everything. So my question now about this article is not where was my masseuse advance, although still wondering. My question now is where's the instructor? Right? Why? So the guy that says, these instructors, this program's great. I'm not doubting that it's not great. It worked in the civilian sector for athletes. Of course it's great. But where's the instructor that should be doing this as part of their job, should be building this resiliency and teaching these kids, and I hate to call them kids, like where's that? So is that part of the problem? Are we cutting down the flight training and the instructors are they phoning it in more?
They're at the airlines.
Dude, it's a different mentality.
Do you see my point though? Like that was, that's what we taught wasn't in the jet.
There was such a problem in the T-38 world of having guys that have actually flown gray jets and keeping guys that have flown gray jets. It is a very tough world for that because they don't have those old crusty instructors anymore.
Well, people like, I don't know. It's, they're afraid to lose, afraid to make mistakes, which is just paralyzes you. I remember being a student going down to maintenance control. They're like, we got 2 jets. One of them has a questionable radar. One of them has a good radar. And the IP would always be, give me that jet with the crap radar. Gonky, we're going to go up there and slay everybody. And we would take off and we get murdered. But we would come back and he was like, it was the confidence. And I'm not saying confidence will overcome everything, but it was the mental game of whatever comes at you, you are going to go through this wall and you are going to succeed.
Correct.
And, dude, honestly, when I was 8 years old, the first time I watched Top Gun, right? When Viper's having the conversation with Maverick about Goose dying, he's like, basically, dude, you got to get back up in the air.
Is that when he was in his underwear?
Yeah. That's why you
don't know, dude. How do they
stand in his
underwear? That's why
room.
Gonky still wears those.
That's always his favorite scene.
No, but I mean, like that's the mentality that you build. And I'm not saying I'm the mentally most tough person out there. I mean, you ask any of my IPs, like, Gonky, we had a fireman carry his rear end through a couple of these phases, but dude,
you never quit.
Right. You just do.
Let me throw this out there. I'll say one more thing about this because we need to move on at some point.
True.
Based on what you guys have just said, right? You're basically saying they're coddled and all this stuff. What if this is the Air Force's attempt to fix that, to give them the tools that they didn't get riding dirt bikes with Gonky? Well,
I mean, that's what I said. I'm like, I don't know how to fix the problem. I mean,
well, maybe that's what I'm saying. I mean, we've had somebody who's in the program now saying this is a lot of it's more than just mental. It's nutrition. It's lifestyle stuff. Because remember, dude, it's hard on your body. I mean, if you had somebody working out with you and teaching you how to do stuff, I think it makes you a better athlete. And if your mind is tougher, you're able to handle that stuff. And you might not have necessarily gotten that younger. Like, I just don't see where this is a failure unless it's like what Wombat says, where you're in lieu of flight time, which I haven't seen any evidence that says this is replacing anything other than it's additive.
Well, how much money are they spending on this? I mean, how many millions of dollars?
We're printing money, dude. Let's not even the amount of money we're printing.
But in the same sentence, they'll tell you we don't have enough money for flight hours. Well, yeah, if you get rid of the massage parlor.
Hold on. Let's not start with the massage. There's other things first. Like, let's be honest. No military guy needs nutrition training, right? You're just going to go pound beers at the club. That's the first thing to get cut.
No, you don't go to the club anymore. Maybe that's the problem. You need a club again. That's where all the debriefing and the learning from the old guys. Doug, as our resident psychology professor, do you have anything to add to this?
I thought I would highlight this part right here. Significantly less neck and back.
I do have neck and back pain.
that means something to all of us.
That's true.
Hold on though. That if you look at that, another student reported that a craft dietitian helped him.
He's not old enough to have neck and back pain.
Okay. And conditioning copes feel stronger in the cockpit.
You
don't get the neck and back pain. Wait. Talk to me in 10 years, bro. That's when it comes. It's not from doing the centrifuge.
Wombat in pilot training. Who helped you get under the ejection seat weight limit?
My ass running in Kingsville
1,000%
twice a day.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to Wombat's story, they literally pulled him out of training because he was too heavy for the seat, and we're going to kick him out. And they were convening a board to decide what they're going to do. And Wombat, on his own, because I lived with him, went on a crazy crash diet, lost like 50 pounds in 2 weeks. And made it happen. But that's because he was tough enough. Like, he didn't hide in a corner and cry, you know? I mean, I saw it with my own eyes, but
I'm not knocking the students. That's the thing I want to make clear here. Like, I mean, I do agree with Gonky that society has changed and there's a lot of coddling and all that. I'm not knocking them. Okay. It's not their fault. Like, if your parents coddle you and your teachers coddle you and your instructors, advanced or primary or whatever, coddle you, you're not the one who's faulted there. My fault is with the people that are coddling, not the person being coddled. Right? It's not their choice. If I screw my boy or my girl up completely mentally, it's not their fault. It's my fault.
I do have something insightful to respond with to that piece. I work at an open admissions college, and I have to make college graduates out of whoever shows up. So,
wow,
teaching people coping skills, teaching people resilience, teaching people the tools they need to get through a difficult experience is exactly as you're suggesting it. I'd say it's a response to what they brought with them. And if it does lower the dropout rate, and that's our goal, I think we need to objectively take a look at the line between hazing and teaching. And that's something that I think would be a whole separate interesting discussion. Most of what you guys have just talked about, I've done as an instructor with not at the college, but teaching people to drive race cars for the same reasons, right? It's high stakes, but you also have to be able to adjust to their capabilities that they bring in and their level of, their ability to take in that information in the spirit that it's meant, if not in the tone that it's meant. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. And I'm not disagreeing with you, Doug. I agree 100%. And I think that's where I may come across as like being the anti in this. Like what I'm saying is you as the instructor is doing that. You're looking at the individual and you're figuring out what does this person need because of what they've brought to the table to be successful in this program, whatever it takes. And my question is, where's the flight instructor doing that? I don't need a masseuse to do that. Right. I don't need a dietitian. What's it with the masseuse? Because I'm pissed off. I didn't have one, dude.
Right. He actually does need a masseuse.
On the masseuse,
it made
right
me
now.
sore,
Jeez,
and I need a masseuse. I'm bitter. You see my point? Like I don't know if that side of it is the answer. My concern is if your job is to be a pilot, and in this case, an F-35 pilot, then I think the answer to make you better handling the stresses of that job is probably dealing with stress in that job and overcoming it, not learning that if you eat 7,000 calories a day and sit on the couch, you're going to gain weight. Like that's not, that's where I have an issue with this. I don't have an issue with you training resiliency because every one of us were trained resiliency. It just wasn't called anything. It was part of flight training. So my issue comes with, is this the fix? And are we putting is this just a label we're putting on it? So now everybody feels good about it. And it's like, well, but is that actually doing anything or not? That's my concern. And it, like they said, it's not cheap. So how many flight hours are we cutting to pay for massages?